If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hello, word nerds. Welcome to the ad for my podcast called The Dictionary. My name is Spencer Parks. I host this podcast. I read the dictionary, the words, the definitions, etymologies, even more. I talk about it. I try to explain things. I also sometimes try to put in some silly jokes or silly sing-songy things. You know, it's just a fun way to read the dictionary. Sometimes I have guests on, and I hope that you will turn on this podcast, check it out, start from the beginning, and, enjoy this, what I like to call edutainment. Check it out in all the places that you can find podcasts.
Hello and welcome to How Did This Not Get Made?
This is the podcast all about the movies you never saw, the scripts that were never filmed, and the ideas that never even made it to the page. My name is David Spencer.
And my name is Daniel Kaka.
If only, the woodpecker cries.
We have gone from comic books, a lot of video games, and now we are diving into literary adaptations, which I don't think we've done too much of now that
We talked about Lord of the Rings. That counts.
Yeah, I guess that does count. We should actually probably mention what we are talking about. We are talking about Holes.
Yeah.
The book Holes, but also the movie Holes.
I am very excited to get into this. You know, as a media-loving millennial, I feel like there's a good chunk of us who saw Holes at a young age and was like, that was a pretty good book adaptation. Do we want to start getting into like our Holes history? The whole history?
Yeah, let's get into our Holes history. David, what is your Holes history?
Well, I remember reading the book as a kid, like it was for school or something, and I remember enjoying it. I feel like it might have been one of my more favorite books we had to read for school. But then the movie came out, and I remember watching the movie and enjoying the movie. What year did the movie come out? It was like 2004 or something, right? 2003. Okay, so I would have been 11 or 12 when that came out. So I probably was at a mindset of starting to recognize movie quality. You know, when you're a kid and just like every movie is just a movie and therefore it's good.
Yeah, you're like, you wouldn't make a movie if it wasn't good.
Exactly.
Like, it had to be good enough to be able to film it and put it on a screen in front of you.
So I feel like this would have been around the time that I was starting to recognize movie quality and what a book adaptation was like. I remember really enjoying it as an adaptation of being like, hey, this is a thing that I know about. And I remember it being something that I probably watched like once or twice in my childhood to teen years. And I feel like it's always had a reputation of being one of those like kind of millennial cult classics of just like a lot of people like to defend Holes online. In preparation for this, I re-watched it for the first time in years.
Does it hold up still?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I'm curious to hear your opinions first, and then I'll say what my opinions were on the rewatch, if that's okay.
Okay. First off, my history of Holes was that I had read it when I was in middle school. It was a huge book. I was definitely at the age where when it came out in the, technically late 90s, but like 2000s is about when it started to pick up.
Yeah.
I don't even know if it was a requirement in schools. I think it was just a book that just became really popular. I may just be misremembering this, but I just remember that being a really popular book. I remember reading it, but when the movie came out, for whatever reason, I didn't want to watch the movie. I think from the trailer, it just made it seem like a silly children's movie.
Everyone in my family names their son Stanley because it's Yell Nats backwards.
Well, that's interesting.
Did you tell him about the lizards?
You don't bother them, they won't bother you. Usually.
From what I remember reading in the book, it didn't come across as like a silly children's book. Like this dealt with a lot of serious issues. It dealt with a kid going to juvenile detention, getting wrongfully convicted, dealing with racism there, especially in the flashbacks. And I remember this being such a serious book and such a well-crafted book. It felt like it was going to be this slapstick humor type movie.
It's a Disney movie starring Shia LaBeouf.
Yeah, when you put in Shia LaBeouf, who was working on Even Stevens at the same time.
I think this was his first movie role, because the credits said introducing Shia LaBeouf.
Yeah, I knew Shia LaBeouf from Even Stevens. And I watched Even Stevens. I had nothing against Shia LaBeouf at the time. He was just a silly kid that was on television. He was entertaining to watch. And for me to take that person, that character, and then put it into Stanley Yelnats, it just didn't fit.
He certainly doesn't seem like somebody whose name would be Caveman.
Yes. It was because of that reason. The trailer, knowing Shia LaBeouf, I couldn't get on board. I really liked the book. I even bought the companion book that came with it, the Stanley Yelnats Survival Guide to Camp Green Lake. I know there was a sequel book. I didn't know about the sequel book until I looked into this, but I really enjoyed the book. But the movie itself, it was interesting. I was surprised with how faithful the book was. And doing the research, I understand exactly the reason why it was so faithful. There were some things that didn't hold up, especially the CGI yellow spotted lizards, which is just painted bearded dragons. I feel like it was kind of that early age of the internet. If you didn't really know anything about lizards, you're just like, oh, that seems like a scary looking lizard, not knowing that it's an actual harmless lizard that a lot of people take in as pets.
Yeah.
As far as my take on the movie, I think it was a good movie. It seemed to wrap things up in a bow that I didn't fully seem satisfied with.
Yes, I will definitely agree with you there.
It happened so quickly, and I know that you have to get all of those points in there. And I like some of the coincidence parts of it, and we'll go into the plot in just a little bit. But I like some of this manifest destiny type feeling that it all merges into one point, but there was just so many things that happened at that one point where it was much more unbelievable in that instance. Yeah.
I think probably one of the reasons that I was drawn to the book when I read it is because I am a sucker for good setups and payoffs, which is something the book did a lot better at than the movie, because the movie always had to remind you at just the right times. Oh, by the way, remember the name Zeroni? Yep. Do you remember? You remember, guys? Whereas in the book, it felt much more satisfying when you realize oh, I get what's happening here.
Yep.
It feels like a good movie that is dealing with some really bad constraints that bring it down. There's a really good movie in there, but it's a PG Disney movie, which definitely brings some of it down. It has, the bad CG lizards. The thing that jumped out to me for how dated it was is the soundtrack.
Oh.
The soundtrack is really bad. It's really on the nose.
They had the cast do a rap.
Oh, that was the worst.
End credits.
Oh, so bad, so bad.
2 suits, 2 tokens in hand. I got no respect because I'm the new man. Got my shovel, shoes full of sand. Check out the tag, the name is Caveman.
But then there was sequences of Kiss and Kate Barlow's initial rampage that has this female Western singer singing about surviving. And it's just okay, you're way too on the nose with the soundtrack.
I will survive, I will endure. When the going's rough, you can be sure I'll tough it out. I won't cave in. If I'm knocked down, I'll get up again. As long as my dream's alive, I will survive.
What do you call it when it's like slow-mo but not shot with a slow-mo camera? Is there a word for that?
I mean, you just slow down the footage without any prep, and then you have that really like jagged look to it.
Yeah. Because they did that all the time, and it was definitely that got grating real fast.
Yeah. I have a feeling they were trying to stretch it for time.
But I will say, with the exception of Shia LaBeouf, you know what? Even Shia LaBeouf was okay. The cast is great.
Yes.
Sigourney Weaver, great. Tim Blake Nelson, great. Dule Hill, great. Patricia Arquette, really good. Jon Voight, good. All the kids are great. I don't know what happened to most of those kid actors, but like the kid who played X-Ray especially, like I found so compelling. The movie's got Henry Winkler in it. Come on.
Yeah.
Who doesn't love a good Henry Winkler appearance?
That threw me off that he was the father in that. And I was like, what? That's amazing.
I watched this movie with Alexa, who had never seen it before. And it was just so funny to be like, here's another cast member going to come up. You got the Kiss and Kate Barlow sequence at the beginning. And she's like, oh, is that Patricia Arquette? When she attacks Stanley's great-grandfather, whatever.
Yeah.
And then you see her as the school teacher. And Alexa had a moment. And she's like, wait a minute. That's Patricia Arquette again. It was great. I wish it was PG-13, can get a little bit more real with some of these stuff with what the kids are going through. What the movie did a really good job with, it does a good job at striking a balance between fun, but also like, hey, here's some real stuff happening. Maybe it could use a little less fun and a little bit more of the real story. But honestly, for the audience it's after, for a kid's movie, for a PG Disney movie, it is like surprisingly deep in its themes. It has more to say than any other 2003 PG Disney movie certainly does.
Yeah.
And that definitely is not lost on me. I definitely agree that the ending wraps things up way too easily. I think this is another thing that I realized watching the movie this time is that this movie have been my first exposure to the problems of the American prison industrial complex.
Yeah.
And my first exposure to the idea that the American justice system is flawed. I didn't choose this. This isn't my fault to say that I grew up in an extremely white bubble. And so reading the book as a kid, with the exception of, Sam and the flashbacks, I don't think I really connected that any of the kids would be anything other than white. And I remember watching the movie as a kid and having a moment of being like, I never thought of Zero as a person of color before, but I guess it makes sense. And now watching it, I'm like,
yeah, of course.
Fucking course all those kids aren't white. Like, are you kidding me? It's a fucking prison camp.
It's a prison in the U.S. Of course it is.
Yeah, this is a prison in the U.S. They're going to fill it with non-white people because that's what America does.
Yes.
And in case there's any misunderstanding what I was saying there, I'm saying that the justice system is flawed to target people of color, not that anything else.
Yeah.
There's so many little things in there, especially Tim Blake Nelson's character. He is such an interesting character to me because he's very much the system is good liberal who is still enforcing bad systems and not questioning the bad systems, but thinking that he's still making a positive change. But at the end of the day, he's still on the side of the oppressor. There's a scene where they're all giving their nicknames, and he's like, I prefer to use the names that their parents gave them, the names that society will use for them. And I'm just like, man, fuck society. Society put these kids in this hellhole. They're not going to use your fucking society names, and they shouldn't have to.
Yeah.
That was definitely the feeling I had during that scene, which might be reading a little much into it, but...
Yeah, I have a feeling that from his character's perspective, he sees it as a sign of respect, but also as a way to distance himself from these kids as well.
Yeah. You get a scene there, there's like a group session where they're talking about how they ended up there, and the character Magnet stole puppies, and he's talking about how it's cruel for these animals to be kept in cages, and I'm like, yeah, you go, kid. All in all, mixed bag. Its existence is more good than bad for the world.
That is true. I think we're ready to go into the notes.
Well, before we do that, Dan, we have still not found our Kiss and Kate Barlow treasure. But instead of forcing children to dig holes, we have a much more ethical way of trying to keep the bills paid. And that is...
by having our listeners dig a 5-foot deep hole or you can just listen to ads. And we are back. If you were a kid of the 90s or the early 2000s, you most likely knew or read the book Holes, which was written by Louis Sachar. The book was published in 1998 and won over 20 literary awards, including the John Newbery Medal, which is that gold circle that you see on every copy of Holes now. If you forgot all about the story or never read it, here's just a recap of it. The story follows the journey of 15-year-old Stanley Yelnats. He's named Stanley from a family tradition of naming their boy Stanley, since it's their last name spelled backwards. Stanley is found guilty of stealing Clyde Sweetfeet Livingston's shoes that were donated to a charity. For his punishment, he is sent to the Texas detention camp, Camp Green Lake. Stanley and his family are known for their bad luck ever since their great-great-grandfather was cursed for failing to carry Madame Zeroni up a mountain and taking her pig before coming to America. At Camp Green Lake, back in the past, it used to be a thriving community, but ever since the outlaw Kissin' Kate Barlow, when she entered, there was some antics there, and then the lake started drying up, and the place became deserted. At the camp, present day, Stanley meets the counselor, Mr. Pendansky, and the other boys with some unusual nicknames: X-Ray, Armpit, Zero, Magnet, Zigzag, and Squid. He is instructed that every day he must dig a hole that's 5 feet deep and wide with the help of his shovel for measurements.
And why are they digging these holes, according to Mr. Sir?
That it builds character. It's there to build character. It's routine. That's all it's there for. Nothing else. Nothing at all.
You're not looking for anything. You're building character. You take a bad boy, make him dig holes all day in the hot sun, and it turns him into a good boy.
This would have been my first brush with even considering the idea that what some people call good for you or justice is actually not going to help at all and is just there to have free labor.
Yep. Oh, what's the documentary? It's like the 13th Amendment.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So
I think it's
13th.
just called 13th.
Yeah. Now, it is a little mish when they tell them that if you find something, you must turn it in, and for that, you get a reward, most likely a day off. So Stanley first struggles with digging his first holes, but he soon gets the hang of it and earns the nickname Caveman. Stanley finds a metal lipstick tube with KB engraved on it. He gives it to X-Ray, who turns it in the next day and is given a day off from digging. The warden, Louise Walker, arrives and orders the boys to start excavating the area. When they can't find any more items, the warden is angered and scratches Mr. Sir, who is another camp counselor, across the face with rattlesnake venom polished nails. Stanley teaches Zero how to read in exchange for digging Stanley's holes. The other boys are not happy with this, and Zigzag gets in a fight with Stanley. The warden makes sure that Stanley is digging his holes and can no longer teach Zero. Zero runs away, and the warden orders that his records be destroyed. Stanley steals a water truck to find Zero, but ironically drives it into a hole. Regardless, he still runs away to find Zero. Stanley finds Zero in an upturned boat and is surviving off of preserved peaches that he calls sploosh. Stanley and Zero travel towards a mountain that looks like a fist. Zero becomes ill from eating sploosh, and Stanley has to carry him all the way up the mountain. At the top of the mountain, they find water and sweet onions that help them from near death. The onions were planted there by Sam, a black farmer that Kissin' Kate Carlo fell in love with, but was forbidden because of racism. After the boys recovered, they returned to the camp. Stanley finds the hole he found the lipstick tube in and begins digging further and finds a suitcase. The warden finds them and demands them to hand it over. The warden and the counselors avoid going into the hole because there is a nest of highly venomous yellow-spotted lizards. The boys avoid being bitten because they reek of onions. By morning, Stanley's lawyer arrives to inform them that his conviction has been overturned. The warden claims that the briefcase is hers, but because the name Stanley Yelnats has been engraved on the case, he gets to keep it. Stanley refused to leave without Zero, whose real name is Hector, and when they can't find his records, he is also set free. Soon the camp is shut down by the Attorney General. It's revealed that Zero's great-great-great-grandmother was Madame Zeroni, and the family curse has been lifted. Stanley's father invents a foot cream that smells like peaches and calls it sploosh. The contents in the briefcase are worth about $2 million. Stanley and Zero split the money. Zero then hires a private investigator to find his mother, and they succeed, and that is the end of the book.
One thing that listeners, if you're not familiar with the book or the movie, you might miss from that synopsis, it's constantly flashing back to lots of different stories. In the movie, and I believe in the book does the scattered flashbacks as well. Flashbacks to Kissing Kate Barlow, and Kate Barlow, the teacher, and her relationship with Sam being murdered and her becoming an outlaw. We get flashbacks to Stanley Yelnatz's no good pig stealing great-great-grandfather and the saga with Madame Zeroni. We get flashbacks to the first Stanley Yelnats. So the background details that like get kind of progressively revealed to you throughout the movie. I mean, even stuff with like Hector's past and how he ended up at the camp. It's a kind of storytelling that Christopher Nolan loves using and Damon Lindelof loves using, where it's weaving these flashbacks in and out of the plot line.
Yeah, it seems like everything's connected. Everything has a purpose. Everything is there for a reason.
It's very much one of those kinds of stories. If you like those kinds of setups and payoffs, this has a lot of those. I mean, in a very children's book kind of unbelievable fantasy way, but they're still there and they're still fun and clever. I don't know how intentional this is, but is something that I thought about while watching the movie this time in regards to the themes of like the prison industrial complex. The fact that this is something where it keeps flashing back to events that happened 150 years prior. It is a history that brought us to this point. Just like Stanley Yelnats didn't become unlucky out of nowhere, you know, it made me think about how like the societal factors that put people in situations where they have to turn to crime, like that is something that goes back generations. The work of making a more equitable place is not just about trying to equalize things right now. It's trying to help heal hundreds of years of history, if that makes any sense. I don't know. It was something that jumped out to me as like, it really does kind of portray a world of like the events of the past affect the events of now.
Yeah. It kind of weakens the point that Pendanski, he brought up this point when he asked Stanley is like, do you know why you're here? Or like, who is to blame for this? And he's like, oh yeah, it's my great-great-grandfather.
Yeah, my no good pig stealing great-great-grandfather.
And he turns to him, he's like, no, it's you. You are to blame. And seeing that like everything is connected, everything happens for a reason, that message, which is supposed to have a lot of weight to it, just kind of dissolves and it feels much weaker once you realize that everything is
exactly. It's a kind of an amazing thing that exists in a PG Disney movie in 2003, that it presents the idea of the only reason you're here is because of your own behavior, and then the movie goes on to prove that statement is false, which is kind of wild that exists.
Yeah. So let's get just a little bit into the book. I do want to say, because I know in my notes I like to go through a lot of the history of the author. There wasn't too much that was interesting or really telling that really helped serve the story. I think the most interesting thing that I found out about the story was that Louis Sachar, he was studying to be a lawyer. He actually passed the bar. So like he was technically a lawyer. But while he was studying law, there was a grade school or like a middle school that was nearby the campus. And they actually had one of the students handing out flyers saying like, hey, we need teacher's assistants. And he's like, sure, that seems easy. You get the joy of teaching without having to deal with grades or like actually disciplining the children. He's really there just to have fun with the kids. And he started just hanging out with them. And he really enjoyed that way more than he enjoyed studying law. And the first book that he came out with was actually a collection of stories of the kids, essentially. Like they would tell him stories and he would kind of create these stories using them as main characters. And that's kind of how he began. But every time that he would write a book, he wouldn't believe that he was actually a writer. He was just like, I'm surprised people are buying my books. He just became an author. Louis Sachar, he was inspired to write Holes when he was living near Austin, Texas, after doing some yard work in the Texas summer. He imagined a place where a lake would have been and what would happen if that lake just suddenly dried up. Now, in the book, if you remember, Stanley was sentenced for 18 months, which coincidentally happens to be the exact amount of time that Sachar spent writing the book. Whenever he is interviewed about being a writer, and anyone who comes up to him and says, what is it like being a writer? And he's like, you have to be willing to rewrite, because for Holes, he rewrote it 5 different times until the publisher was satisfied. And he said, if you can continually entertain yourself and be happy with your writing, even if you're rewriting the same story, then you can be a writer.
Wow.
For the name Stanley Yelnats, the book and the author has been praised for the clever name, although Louis Sachar has never thought it was any good in interviews. He's actually talked about this, that in his writing process, whenever he has writer's block, he just pushes right through and he'll just write down anything. It doesn't matter. Even if it's bad, he'll still write it down, knowing that months later he's going to revisit it and possibly have better ideas. So when it came to the last name Yelnats, that was actually a stand-in name, and he just assumed that he would just change it later, but he never ended up doing so.
Yeah, that's a pretty common story, especially in like sketch writing that happens where it's just like, oh, we just got to get this written down. Let's just write a name down and we'll change it later. And then, they never end up changing it later.
No, they don't.
The other thing about that, though, is that it also ends up playing into a setup and payoff with it being like how Zero, who's still learning how to read, is able to recognize that the chest is Stanley's.
Yeah.
Praising this movie for what it does for like baby's first prison industrial complex's bad story. Definitely deserves to lose a couple of points for white kid teaching brown kid how to read.
Yeah.
That's I'm going to give a knock against the movie.
Yeah. Speaking of which, the book does dive into some heavier issues, which includes racism. Mm-hmm. And there have actually been 2 attempts to get this book banned.
Oh, wow.
In 2004, a parent objected to the book's morality when the book was read out loud to a 4th grade class at C.K. Burns School in Saco, Maine. The claim was the book was more violent than the movie, and the children should not be exposed to that. Then in 2009, a family challenged the book after the book was also read out loud to a 5th grade class at Connors Emerson School at Bar Harbor, also in Maine, stating that it was inappropriate for children that young. I have a feeling that the complaint was more about the history of racism, and they just didn't want to say the quiet part out loud.
That's what it always is. All the think of the children thing. We want to continue to be bigots, and we don't like anybody telling me I'm not allowed to.
Yeah. So let's just hope that Florida isn't next.
Ah.
Yeah. With any successful book, there's always going to be a push for a film adaptation. So let's enter Richard Kelly.
I did not realize, by the way, that the book was at 98. Like, I thought the book was a little bit older than that. But I guess, things that happened during your childhood, you kind of get a skewed time frame on when they existed.
It's one of those parts of pop culture where you just kind of assumed it was always around.
Yeah.
And Holes is just kind of one of those phenomenons.
Yeah.
What do you know about Richard Kelly before I move on?
I don't know if I know anything about Richard Kelly. Let me look up the name Richard Kelly. Oh, okay. I just looked it up. Donnie Darko guy.
Yeah. Kelly is mostly known as the filmmaker behind the film Donnie Darko, a story about an angsty teenager that uses a wormhole to travel through time to sacrifice himself in order to save the world with the help of a imaginary 6-foot bunny rabbit named Frank.
AKA the movie that if you were in middle school between the years of 2001 and 2006, you definitely knew at least 30 kids who called Donnie Darko their favorite movie.
Yep, I was one of those. I have the special edition downstairs on my shelf.
Oh, okay, wow.
Yes, yeah. So keep in mind, this is 1999. Donnie Darko doesn't come out until like 2001. So Donnie Darko has not happened yet. 1999, Kelly is working on making a name for himself, and he's pitching different films to multiple studios. One film that he pitched and wrote was an adaptation of Holes for Phoenix Pictures. Now, his script is notorious for being the edgier version of the book. It takes a lot of creative freedom, including setting it in a post-apocalyptic era.
What? Why would you need to do that?
He doesn't. Now, it makes sense knowing that he was pitching to Phoenix and not Disney, because Phoenix Pictures were known for making films like U-Turn, Urban Legend, Apt Pupil, The Thin Red Line, and Lake Placid. So not exactly a family-friendly environment. And that is the script we're going to go over right now. So,
oh boy.
We open on a school bus, driving through a dry desert. Inside is Stanley Kramer.
Okay, already like undoing one of the memorable things from the book.
Exactly, yeah. He is handcuffed with his head resting on the window. Stanley is 16, blonde-haired, blue eyes. The narrator is vague about what crime he committed, but it sounds serious. This is a quote from the script. He did not feel sorry for what he had done, but feeling sorrow is not adequate punishment for such a crime. Feeling sorrow does not absolve the crime from the memory of the victims, if the victims are still breathing.
I really hope that the crime is the same thing of just stealing shoes.
The guard informs Stanley that they've arrived to Camp Green Lake. Stanley first meets with Mr. Sir. He gives him 3 blue jumpsuits and instructs him on what he's doing. Every day, except Sunday, he must dig a hole 5 feet deep and wide. If anything is found, it must be turned in. Stanley is shown the dry land. Mr. Sir explains that there is no fence or guard towers because if you run away, you'll surely die. If it's not the dehydration that'll get you, the yellow-spotted lizard surely will. All right, we're staying pretty faithful with the stories in this segment so far.
So far.
Stanley is given a shovel and meets Pendanski. He tells Stanley to never upset the warden. From Stanley's interaction with the counselors, he comes off as arrogant with a humble brag type attitude. So here's a quote from him. "You don't have to be nice to me just because all the other counselors are assholes. There's nothing you can do to help me. There's nothing that you can say that'll make me believe that I'm going to enjoy this experience." Stanley digs his first hole and struggles because the ground is dense. While Stanley takes a break, another camper, X-Ray, approaches Stanley, giving him advice on how to dig a hole. X-Ray asks why Stanley is here, but he doesn't want to talk about it. X-Ray tells him that he stole a 7-Eleven Slurpee machine and threw it off the roof of his school.
That sounds rad.
Yeah.
Give X-Ray a medal.
Yes. And X-Ray, he starts pointing out the other camper, but more specifically Zero to Stanley. There's another camper, Theo. He notices Stanley doesn't have sunscreen, so he actually gives him some of his own. He also gives Stanley advice on how to survive out here. Stanley notices the scars on Theo's wrist, and Theo explains that he tried to kill himself.
Oh, wow.
Another camper, Alan, introduces himself to Stanley and offers a cigarette. Stanley declines. Alan spills his story after asking Stanley if he's ever seen a high-speed car chase. A quote from Alan, "And that's how I got caught. I had a girlfriend, this big titty slut from Albany. She made PCP brownies and we went joyriding in my Camaro, ran it through the front of a Jack-in-the-Box." Lastly, Alan warns Stanley never to swear in front of the warden.
Okay.
So we're getting the sense here that
This ain't even Stevens.
this is a bit edgier.
Was that Shia LaBeouf in iRobot that he kept saying, like, you don't know how to swear?
He tried swearing. It was Will Smith who told him, "You are not good at swearing."
Yeah, that's what I meant. But it was Shia LaBeouf who played the kid.
Yes.
Because now I'm just like picturing the same exact thing happening here of just awkward child Shia LaBeouf trying to curse.
Yes.
And I guess in this version of the story, we've got just like Will Smith aged down 15 years playing X-Ray.
Basically, yeah.
Spoon, listen, I got this fine-ass little yummy. I mean, she is complete and agreeable. I mean, ass-high spankable, Spoon.
What does that even mean?
You know what it means, man. Okay, now stop barricading. Let me
First
get
of
the damn
all,
ass keys.
Stop cussing, because you're not good at it.
Stanley finishes digging at sunset. Mr. Sir uses a digital clipboard to update the holes dug up in the area. Stanley is told to mark his hole Sol 1, S-O-L 1, and that's how they mark each of the holes when they're done. Mr. Sir inspects the hole and finds that it's too shallow, and Stanley needs to start over since he just marked his first hole complete. Stanley begins digging as the sun sets completely. We zoom out to an aerial shot revealing hundreds of holes all over the dry lake bed. In Tent D, later that night, Stanley enters exhausted and is informed by Pendanski to get to sleep soon because he'll be awake in 2 hours. Stanley has no problem passing out. Stanley and the other campers are awakened by a harsh whistle. He enters the mess hall for breakfast. There we see 96 other campers. In line, X-Ray banters with the cook, Derek. Now I'm going to kind of go through their banter here, just so that you get an idea of the tone of this movie. So X-Ray says, "What is this horseshit?" from Derek. "You don't want to know, kid. Just eat it and hope it doesn't give you cancer." X-Ray, "Would you eat this shit?" Derek, "Not a chance." Theo, "What do you eat?" Derek, "Pussy." X-Ray, "We both know there ain't no pussy on Camp Green Lake." Derek, "Sure there is. I'm looking at one right now." The group yells at this sick burn. Oh boy. Stanley sits with X-Ray, Theo, Alan, and Zero. The gang explains that digging 2 holes the first day was just hazing, and that Stanley's measurements were correct. Stanley asks what they're digging for, and they all shut the conversation down. Alan passes Stanley a note that reads, "Be careful. They're watching and listening." The warden doesn't allow any chat of what they're looking for. The campers circle outside around a half-staff flagpole. In the center is a dead body. The warden, a 52-year-old man, tall with a military crew cut, tells the campers that Jonathan Gaines was found dead after trying to run away 12 days ago. The warden forces the campers to say his name in unison. Later that day, Zero informs Stanley that he's sleeping in Jonathan's bed. He also lets Stanley know that he's here because he killed somebody. Stanley continues to dig and finds a human bone. The screams of children can be heard subconsciously.
Oh my gosh, this is so okay, guy.
Yeah. Stanley goes to Pendanski for water. In their conversation, we learn that Pendanski's wife died in the blast.
In the blast?
In the blast.
Jeez, come on, guys.
Stanley gives Pendanski the bone. He orders the other campers to do an excavation to retrieve the rest of the bones, and Stanley has been excused for the rest of the day. Stanley sticks around while the other campers dig up the rest of the bones. X-Ray makes a deal with Stanley. If he finds anything else, then he'll give it to X-Ray so that he can catch a break. They lay out the bones and determine that the bones belong to a woman named Diane. Pendanski checks the charts, and his eyes are white with fear. He finds a diamond engagement ring on her left hand. This was Pendanski's wife, and he begins to weep.
Okay.
The campers are ordered to put Diane's bones in the incinerator. Her skull is placed on a shelf, along with the others that were found. In a flashback, we see Diane working as a waitress at Bob's Big Boys. She's on her break smoking a cigarette when she's unexpectedly enveloped in an explosion. So back at the tent, Zero tells Stanley about Jonathan. He was about to turn 18 when he ran. He figured regular jail was going to be worse than juvie. Stanley goes to sleep. In a dream or a flashback, we see a girl swimming in a pool. When he wakes up, he notices Theo's cot has an engraving on it that reads, "Bury the past."
Let the past die.
Yeah.
Kill it if you have to.
In a flashback, we see Stanley at a birthday party for his sister, Rebecca. His parents, Joe and Sue, are hosting a pool party for their daughter. Stanley is being a menace, blasting his super soaker on his sister and her friends. To make up for his behavior, Stanley is asked to bring out the cake and lead the birthday song. The party continues, and Stanley dives into the pool with the other kids. When he surfaces, the crowd is silent. In the distance is a large mushroom cloud. People begin to scream and grab their children out of the water. Sue is carrying Rebecca in her arms. Mr. Sir wakes up the camp. Stanley requests to use his day off for another day, but Mr. Sir is adamant that he must use his day off today. At breakfast, the boys discuss what he should do with his day off, and they recommend the rec room, since there's music you can listen to in there. A shouting match starts when X-Ray calls Anthony the N-word. The room goes silent when Anthony says, "You better not let the warden hear none of that shit. He'll fucking bury your ass."
Yikes.
Yeah. Stanley goes to the rec room, and Zero promises they'll meet him there, since that's where they go hang out afterwards anyways. Stanley walks into the rec room and discovers only 4 CDs. It's Led Zeppelin 4, Nirvana Unplugged in New York, there's Creedence Clearwater Revival, the greatest hits, and Metallica. He plays Metallica's Unforgiven. He's rocking out to the song and suddenly freezes when he sees the warden. The warden tells Stanley Metallica is the devil's music, but he doesn't need to turn it off. Stanley tells the warden that the song reminds him of his father. It's implied that he recently died. Stanley asks what they're digging for. The warden is caught off guard by this question and gives a bullshit answer, stating that repetition builds discipline. Stanley calls him out by saying it's a crock of shit. The warden strikes back by asking about Rebecca and that he knows everything about him from his file. The warden leaves, and none of them actually answered the questions.
I stopped imagining Shia LaBeouf in this role, and now, because of the Donnie Darko connection, I'm imagining Jake Gyllenhaal in this role.
Yeah.
Which still doesn't quite fit, but then again, Jake Gyllenhaal, I feel like, can sell anything, so, you know.
Yeah, I think so. Or, the kid in the movie Pecker, he was also in Terminator 2.
Oh, I don't know the name offhand.
Edward Furlong. Although he's a brunette, but still, like, I can see him in this type of role.
Sure.
Yeah, he's kind of that edgy teenager type.
I mean, the age would have been all wrong. Like, he wouldn't have been the right age when this came out, but that's fine.
Yeah. Stanley walks outside, looking down at the holes. We cut to a flashback. Stanley and his family are running from a crowd down a Texas interstate. Stanley and Rebecca are separated from their parents just before an army guard puts them on a truck and brings them to safety. The truck takes off, leaving their parents behind. We cut back to Stanley, who finds Zero and assists him with digging his hole. Cut to 2 months later, which is kind of confusing in the script. In the title that's supposed to be on screen, it says several months later, and then in the description it's like, we've only been here for 2 months. Stanley is digging a hole next to Zero. Stanley is now one of the boys and is actually the fastest digger now. In a montage, we followed Stanley's day-in-the-life routine. The one thing that everyone looks forward to is Saturday night, because Sunday was their day off, and the warden is adamant that no one works on Sunday because that's the Lord's day. Mm-hmm. The campers are gathered in the rec room, playing games as CCR's Fortunate Son plays in the background. In the commotion, Pendanski walks across the room to Alan and whispers something into his ear. Alan nods and Pendanski walks away. Alan gathers Stanley, Zero, and X-Ray to work in the laundry room. They load up the truck and Pendanski signals Alan to get on the truck along with everyone else. They're doing something without the warden knowing. Mr. Sir spots the laundry truck as it is exiting the camp. In the truck, Alan tells the boys that they're going to the way station / truck stop supply exchange. This seems to be some kind of reward for them. Back at the rec room, the warden enters and begins counting heads. In the truck, though, Pendanski and Derek light up a joint. They arrive at the heavily guarded way station and get through as if they're on official business to drop off laundry. The boys are given civilian clothes to change into. They first unload the laundry and load the truck with supplies, but then the boys are treated to the bar called The Last Stop.
All right.
Stanley has a serious talk with Pendanski, with Pendanski implying that things are going to get worse when Stanley turns 18, and there's about a 10% chance that he's going to get parole with the crime that he had committed. He is warned not to run. The desert is much larger than he thinks it is, and he'll never survive. Pendanski manages to pay for 2 prostitutes for Zero and Stanley. Stanley goes through a humiliating premature ejaculation moment and admits that he was a virgin.
This movie, oh my god.
He asked Stacy, who is the sex worker, for a hug, and it looked like Stanley needed that more than anything. The boys and the counselor head back to the truck. In a flashback, we see Stanley and Rebecca running through the woods. Gunfire is heard in the distance. Rebecca trips and falls. Stanley goes back to help and sees that she's coughing up blood. The next morning, the campers report to the flagpole. Pendanski is noticeably missing. The warden knows that 4 campers left the facility yesterday and asks them to step forward, but no one does. The warden asks Theo specifically, and he denies ever leaving. Mr. Sir proceeds to beat him up. Stanley steps forward and admits he left. Zero, Alan, and X-Ray follow suit. The crowd goes silent when Stanley says, "It was worth every second to get out of this shithole, sir. It was worth every moment not having to look at your fucking face." Stanley attempts to tackle Mr. Sir to stop him from beating up Theo, but Mr. Sir knocks him to the ground and puts a boot on his neck. Zero and Alan run to help Stanley, but they stop when Mr. Sir points a gun at Stanley's head. Mr. Sir lets Stanley go, and the warden gives them their punishment. They are now in charge of digging 2 holes a day.
Okay.
In the supply room, Pendanski slams Mr. Sir up against the wall. Pendanski states that the warden is never going to find it. Mr. Sir believes that it is still out there.
Okay.
It doesn't say in the script what it is.
Okay.
Well, at least this early on in the script. Yeah. In the lake bed, Mr. Sir fills Stanley's canteen and dumps the water out onto the sand. I believe in the movie and even in the book, he doesn't even fill this canteen. He just like runs the water for a little bit and then shuts it off.
Which I feel like is a pretty effective moment. That's one of those moments that I always remember of being like, oh, wow, that's cruel.
It's a really heavy moment. I like what they did in the movie. I don't like the idea of filling up the canteen and then emptying out. Just not filling it up at all is just, it's such a good moment.
Yeah.
So Stanley continues to dig until he hits a metal object. It's about the size of a hammer and seems to be attached to something larger. Zero determines that this must be a spark plug. Stanley pockets the item to give to X-Ray in the mess hall as he promised. The next day, X-Ray claims that he found the item in his hole and reports it to Pendanski. Pendanski shows it to the warden and he orders an excavation of that area. So just to clear up what happened, Stanley found the object in the east sector and X-Ray was digging in the southwest sector when he claims to have found the object. So they are in the wrong place. The warden comes out donning his military uniform to watch over the dig site. It's confirmed that they're searching for something in particular and not just digging to build character. 3 military trucks drive into the camp. The warden orders for lights and excavation equipment to be set up. The officers salute the warden, implying that he's still in the military. The campers are forced to keep digging through the day and will be replaced at sunset. The campers are in charge of digging while the counselors sift through the dirt. Zero and Stanley agree to keep the actual finding location a secret. After sundown, the excavation site is revealed to be about 40 feet across and 15 feet deep. The warden paces around the site with Mr. Sir, who is now sporting a military uniform and a freshly shaved crew cut. The day crew leaves and the night crew takes over. In the rec room, Stanley and Zero debate on what they should do. They want to tell the truth about where they found the object so that they can stop digging for good, but he doesn't want that information to be given to the warden, so they conclude that they need to run away. That night, X-Ray asks Stanley if they should tell the truth, but Stanley says no, they'll be punished either way. Theo is still awake, and he overhears this conversation. The next morning, the excavation site is about 70 feet across. All they found was a skeleton that belonged to a mechanic named Gordon Barclay. This is not what the warden was looking for, and the remains are sent to the incinerator.
No big deal. We just found a skeleton.
Yeah, just another dead body. We found hundreds of them. Anthony uses a pickaxe to dig into a concrete wall. It begins to leak and suddenly hundreds of gallons of liquid spill into the giant hole. One of the military officers flicks a lit cigarette into the hole and the liquid immediately catches fire. It's gasoline. Pendanski screams for everyone to get out of the pit. Everyone gets out safely and watches the large pit burning before their eyes. In a flashback, we see Gordon Barclay working at a Texaco gas station. He's unloading gasoline into an underground tank when suddenly the explosion happens. Present day, the campers throw dirt onto the fire until it finally goes out. One camper, Mickey Johansson, was injured from the fire and was taken away on a stretcher. Lucky for him that he got his parole 8 months earlier than expected. The campers head back to their tent. Theo stops Stanley and says, quote, "Everything happens for a reason. The fire was no coincidence. It was God showing us the way home."
Okay.
We cut to the warden's office. Theo enters, and we cut before he can say anything. The next morning, Stanley, Zero, and X-Ray are escorted by Mr. Sir to the east sector, where they find the warden, Theo, in a freshly dug hole. The warden asks for the truth. Stanley refuses to give up any information in fear that whatever they find in the hands of the warden would be dangerous. They beat Theo and shove him into the hole. The warden asks Stanley if he dug his sister's grave before he killed her.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Mr. Sir begins throwing dirt onto Theo. The warden asks Zero for information and tells him that he could be let go on parole tomorrow if he cooperates. X-Ray is screaming at them to tell the truth. Zero lies and says that he found it months ago in the southwest sector and runs away. Mr. Sir points his gun at Zero and the warden says, "Take him out."
Oh my gosh.
Theo emerges from the hole and hits Mr. Sir in the back of the head with a rock. He drops the gun and Stanley quickly picks it up and points it at the warden. X-Ray and Stanley get in the truck and leave Mr. Sir and the warden behind. They call for Theo, but he stays, stating, quote, "I can't. I have to stay here. God meant for it to happen this way." X-Ray and Stanley catch up to Zero when suddenly they hear a gunshot and a hole appears in the windshield. Theo tries to stop the warden from shooting, and the warden points his gun at Theo and pulls the trigger. Zero gets in the car and tells them that they need to drive south and head to the Mexican border. They don't make it far and end up crashing the truck into a ditch, totaling it. X-Ray seems to have gotten the worst of it after coughing up blood on the deployed airbag. It's possible that he cracked a rib. They get out of the truck. They inspect the concrete slab that they crashed into. Underneath it, they discovered a buried parking garage filled with hundreds of cars, all of them abandoned. They go in to avoid being found. They walk through the parking garage, inspecting the empty cars and finding skeletons of people who suddenly died. Zero breaks into a Range Rover and helps X-Ray into the passenger seat so that he may rest. Stanley ventures to find food and supplies. The parking garage appears to be attached to a mall, and Stanley walks through the entrance of an abandoned Sears. He sets up camp at a living room display, and Zero and X-Ray join him. The three of them are relaxed, playing Trivial Pursuit and eating cans of chili. Zero pushes the question on why Stanley killed his sister.
Real quick, I just want to point out, I like that X-Ray's getting more love.
Yeah.
X-Ray's a great character. I mean, this version of X-Ray obviously is completely different, but I think X-Ray is one of the better parts of original Holes, Holes Classic Edition.
This one's interesting for sure, and he has a lot more to do.
Yeah.
Stanley tells his story as we flash in and out of flashbacks. He and his sister started raiding grocery stores, but would result to eating puppy chow whenever shelves were found empty. Rebecca started feeling sick, and they found their way to an elementary school turned into a military hospital. The place is swamped, and many of the rooms were blocked off to stop people from entering. Stanley pleads with the guard while holding his hyperventilating sister, and they admit her. They were there for 2 days when suddenly Rebecca's throat started to close up. They gave her a trachenectomy so that she could breathe. For days, she continued to suffer, and Stanley couldn't take it anymore and eventually removed her tube. But someone caught him doing it, and he is blamed for killing his sister. X-Ray tells him not to worry, and that he'll tell Rebecca that he says hi. He's got X-ray vision, which means that he can see through space and time, and he can see her right now. So ding, we're going back to the original source. X-Ray can see through space and time.
Okay.
The store around them morphs back in time, and we see vibrant shoppers. As his last words, X-Ray says, "You are my best friends." Stanley and Zero stand over X-Ray's grave. They bury him next to where they crashed the truck. Zero and Stanley say that this is the last hole they will ever dig.
Okay, guy. Oh, jeez. I'm sorry. That's just like...
Yep. With the duffel bag, flashlights, and a gun, The two head back to Camp Green Lake as the sun goes down. They find the hole Sol 112, where Stanley originally found the hammer-like object. They dig with their bare hands until they find a rectangular metal box and open it. It's an intricate metal housing with 23 spark plug hammers. One is missing because that's the piece that Stanley found earlier. This is some kind of weapon, suspected to be the weapon that started this war. Footsteps can be heard on the surface. They look up to see Mr. Sir pointing a gun at them and force them to get out of the hole. The warden has been waiting for them on the surface. Headlights can be seen in the distance headed towards them. The warden says, "Thank you for serving your country. May God have mercy on your souls." Mr. Sir aims a pistol at Zero. Just before he can pull the trigger, a loud electrical snapping sound is heard, and Mr. Sir collapses to the ground. One of the spark plug hammers has embedded itself into the back of his head. The warden reaches for his gun, and another spark plug hammer embeds itself into his chest, and the warden collapses to the ground. Zero has a moment of clarity, and he sees the big picture. Everything is connected. In a montage, we see moments from the movie, some of which reveal some mysteries. We see Jonathan Gaines running away as Mr. Sir is the one that shot him dead. The warden is the military officer that witnessed Stanley pulling the tube from his sister's throat. The truck pulls up to the boys. It's Pendanski, with a crew cut, wearing a military uniform. They quickly bury the warden and Mr. Sir. They put the remaining 21 spark plug hammers into the truck. Pendanski throws the boys a stack of fatigues and tells them that they've been drafted. Pendanski drives the two out of Camp Green Lake for good. We cut to a transport ship on the ocean. In civilian clothes, Pendanski, Stanley, and Zero make their way to the back of the ship and drop the duffel bag filled with this mysterious weapon into the ocean. Stanley and Zero say to each other, "Bury the past," and the ship trails off into the horizon. The end.
Oh boy. Oh boy. Okay. I don't know if you're going to tell me something different here, but I'll tell you exactly what this whole script and the existence of this script sounds like to me. And this sounds to me like one of those scripts that was written never with the intention of it getting made, but just with the intention of studios finding it interesting and saying, oh, we're not going to make this movie, but we like this person, so we'll keep this around because maybe they'll have something else that we want to do. I know that's a fairly common thing that happens with Hollywood writers, is they'll write some crazy script that is honestly not intended to actually get made, but is just intended for a calling card, basically.
One of our first conversations was talking about the movie Balls Out, which was one of those scripts that was on the blacklist.
Yep.
That it was two writers, ironically, during the writer's strike, which is happening right now. Hopefully not happening by the time this is released. Balls Out was one of those scripts that came out of the writer's strike where two writers found each other and said, let's just make the most ridiculous, most unfilmable movie ever, just to kind of get in front of producers and executives, just so that they can have a good laugh and get noticed from the script.
Absolutely. This script also feels extremely of its time, of trying to be edgy and dark and, oh, we're going to do the Tarantino it up and change everything.
Also, think about the time that this would have been made and would have come out. You have a lot of these teen drama movies that were very popular. These kind of like teen sex comedies as well. Like you have American Pie, I believe, is coming around this time. So this idea of being edgy with teenagers is not unheard of. So in this context now, today, this seems ridiculous, where back then, this probably didn't have that much of a blow.
This 90s edginess, it's completely stripping out any of the theme that would have been in there. It's not trying to amp up the edginess to improve the theme. No, it's just having cursing for the sake of cursing. It's having a post-apocalyptic world for the sake of a post-apocalyptic world. The changes are not additive at all.
No.
It really just feels like somebody going like, okay, how do I get noticed in Hollywood? Let's just make this batshit insane adaptation of a popular children's book right now. And that's what's going to get me onto people's desks.
Yeah. And what should have actually been the case, or possibly an adaptation that may have been taken more seriously, is that if you wanted that edgier feel to it, you can still have that faithful adaptation, but you can ground the characters. These are teenagers. They are incarcerated. They're going to swear.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of like when I watch The Wire, and you're so used to all of these cable network cop dramas where the language is very clean. And then you watch The Wire and it's the same formula, but you have swearing. In fact, they have a whole scene where two detectives inspect a crime scene and all they say is just different variations of the word fuck.
It reminds me as well of, I never watched the film adaptation of Ender's Game because I just assumed that it would be watering down the way the kids are acting in the book. It's not quite cursing like to the same degree as The Wire, but it's definitely more than I'd expect in a movie with Harrison Ford in it.
Yeah. So this is Richard Kelly trying to appeal to Phoenix Pictures. I told you before, just a list of the movies, just to kind of get an idea of like what they are known for. They are the edgy film studio. They are the studio that's smaller, but is willing to take chances and risks. So it makes sense for him to be like, we're not going to do just a kids movie because the studio's not known for kids movies. Mm-hmm. But turns out that Phoenix Pictures was not expecting this at all. And actually they wanted a straight adaptation from Richard Kelly. And they were like, no, we don't want this at all. I actually did find a quote from Richard Kelly, who is looking back at this situation as like an older, changed person. And he says, quote, "I was very naive, and I was convinced that I could convince them that this was a cooler version of the movie. And they were like, no, we want to make a PG-rated, pretty faithful adaptation of this best-selling book. We have Andrew Davis directing. You're insane. Please sign this contract. We're not going to pay you any more money. We respect you. We like you, but we're moving in a different direction." He's definitely owned up to it. There was a tweet that was put out there. I forget when he tweeted this, but in the tweet he says, "Here's a link to my script for the 1999 post-apocalyptic adaptation of Louis Sachar's Holes for Phoenix Pictures." And there's a link to a Google Doc, which is where I got this script from. Mm-hmm. He's unapologetic about it. He's like, yeah, I was a young writer. This is just what I did. And it's pretty famous for, I mean, we just went through it. It definitely stands out and it's going to stick with you.
It's definitely a funny little time capsule as well, because in the same way that the Shia LaBeouf movie is very much a time capsule of 2003, that script is a totally different kind of time capsule of the same era.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Kelly would go on to create his cult classic, Donnie Darko, which was released in 2001, which has a lot of similar tones from what we read in his whole scripts. There's angsty feelings, overly smart teenagers, a sense of destiny, and overwhelming connectivity. If you dropped Gary Jules' Mad World into this version of Holes, it would not feel out of place at all. But moving on to the movie, for the director Andrew Davis, he actually, previous to this, he directed Collateral Damage and The Fugitive, and he was mostly known as like the R-rated action movie guy.
Yeah.
And he was like, I want to actually make a movie for kids. I don't want to be known for this. I want to like branch out.
Yeah.
And this was his way of branching out.
I'm curious. Is this a time where maybe he had kids of his own and wanted to have a movie that his kids could watch?
I do not know enough about Andrew Davis to confirm that, but this seems to be the case with a lot of directors as well. So like Martin Scorsese, when he made Hugo, I believe that was a request from his wife, who said like, you have a child, you have a kid. Why not make a movie that he can actually watch?
Yeah.
And that's where Hugo came from. Same thing with Robert Rodriguez and Spy Kids, although some may argue that Robert Rodriguez has been trying to make children's movies for years and keeps on getting pigeonholed into making action movies. Whenever you watch those action movies, you're like, wow, this feels like a cartoon almost.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. Now, for Andrew Davis, for whatever reason, he chose to direct this movie. He kind of knew about the Richard Kelly script, and he knew that Phoenix fired him. I don't exactly know when Disney got involved, but it seems like they got involved pretty early as well. But for Andrew Davis, he knew that he needed to find someone to adapt the script, or at least adapt the book into the script. And he thought, who's the best person to do that? And that person was the author of the book Holes, Louis Sachar.
I noticed that while watching the movie when I was like, oh, hey, the screenplay is written by the author, which definitely plays into how it's a faithful adaptation. I feel like authors doing screenplays, I know somebody who has written the script for the movie based off of his book to great success, which is, of course, an author who has many of his books turned into movies, but then he said, no, I'm going to write my own script. That is Stephen King writing and directing Maximum Overdrive.
Yes.
A lot of people have directed Stephen King novels and stories. And I finally decided if you want something done right, you ought to do it yourself.
A better example, Neil Gaiman.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
The choice to cast Shia LaBeouf was actually kind of a request from Davis. So when he talked to the casting director, is quoted saying he wanted to find someone who is a young Tom Hanks.
Okay.
One aspect that they did leave out of the movie that was pretty prominent in the books had to do with Stanley's body. So when Stanley first arrives to the camp, he's a much bigger person. And throughout him digging all these holes, he loses a significant amount of weight. They decided to do away with this completely just because having to deal with this in a live action film, they didn't want to deal with that. They just figured like he comes in and he's just the same size all the way through. Shia LaBeouf was working simultaneously on this film and Even Stevens, oftentimes both productions in the same day.
Wow. Wait, but I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Holes is a Disney movie. Even Stevens is a Disney show. Shia LaBeouf was making both of these when he would have been 16. 2003, he was born in 1986. If you think it was probably filming in 2002, that would put him at about 16. My point is it really sounds like Disney is violating some child labor laws, I think.
Yeah, but it's for two different productions, so it's different. He works 6 hours on one set, 6 hours on the other set. They don't overlap.
Okay.
I'm not saying you're wrong, but I feel like they found a loophole.
Yeah, okay. Wow.
We mentioned before the yellow-spotted lizards just being bearded dragons painted, which I'm sure there was something violated there. I think the most interesting and probably the most practical thing that once you think about it, you're just like, oh yeah, duh, that makes sense, is how they shot the holes sequence or like the digging sequences.
Okay.
So they had different areas for different depths of the holes. So they would have one area where it was 5 feet deep. One area was like 4, 3, 2, and like where they're beginning. So instead of having to actually dig the holes, they're just like, oh, we're just going to go to like the 3-foot area and we're just going to start filming in that area. And then it's like at the end of the day, let's go to the 5-foot area.
And I'm sure it was a situation where it was like, okay, we're going to film this part of the movie from this angle, and then we're going to turn 90 degrees, and now it's 6 scenes later to be able to keep using the same area over and over again.
Exactly. And it's a desert area, which they all shot in like Central California. I don't know exactly where, but it's like pretty close to it's nowhere near Texas.
Yeah.
It is California. But it's a pretty clever move. Thinking about it now, like, duh, makes sense, but pretty clever on their part.
Sure, yeah.
The last news about holes actually comes from this year.
Oh.
2023. So there was an interview with producer Mike Madovey He did an interview with Collider back in April of 2023, and he revealed that there was actually talks about making a Holes television series. And I have a feeling that he wasn't supposed to say that.
Oh.
Because when they were asking him about his experience with the original Holes, like they even asked him about Richard Kelly's script, and he's like, I don't remember reading that. And he's like, so what was it like filming Holes? And he's like, it seemed pretty great. He is, I mean, I don't know really how to say this without like it seeming insulting, but Mike Madovey is like much older.
Gotcha. He's got a lot of memories to sort through.
Exactly. So he is like misremembering things. It just seemed like kind of an offhand thing, but like when it came to him saying like, oh yeah, and they're going to do a Holes television series. Oh, wait.
Did it seem like they were planning on making that in 2003 and then did the movie instead? Or was this like 15 years later, hey, remember Holes? Let's turn that into a TV show. Did he specify when that would have been happening?
Recently.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. So like recently somebody is working on a TV show.
Mm-hmm. So there might be a reboot of Holes. It might be a straight to Disney Plus series. There hasn't been like an official announcement from Disney, so a lot of this is hearsay, which is why I suspect that he kind of said it by accident.
Yeah. As many problems as the movie has, I feel like it doesn't really need to be adapted again necessarily. Like, especially as a Disney Plus TV show, I feel like you're going to get into some territory where you are going to have to stretch some things out in a way that might make some bad things too lighthearted. I guess it could be something depending on what direction it was in and who was making it and everything. But if it's a Disney Plus streaming series, I'm going to say no to that one.
Yeah, I don't think it needs to be done, but I can kind of see why they would want to do an updated version of this story.
Yeah. If somebody's coming in with a really good vision, maybe there's something to it.
But yeah, that's everything about Holes.
All right. Well, I guess that's going to go ahead and wrap this episode up. Thank you, everybody, so much for listening. If you want to find more episodes of this podcast, you can go to our website, pipedreampodcasts.com, where you can find links to our social media pages. We are on Twitter at HDTNGM. We're on Instagram at HowDidThisNotGetMade. And you can send us your emails, notgetmade@gmail.com. Let us know any suggestions for future episodes, any corrections, or any other details that you might have and want to share. Also at that website, did you know that we got other podcasts? It's Pipe Dream Podcasts, plural, with an S, not just the singular podcast. So while you're there, you can check out Pod Made You Special, Escape from Vault Disney, Come on Google Pods, Mystery Shack Look Back, and more.
I did have to look up our website, and yes, our website is also plural, podcasts.
Yes, Pipe Dream Podcasts. You can also find us on Patreon. For donating to our Patreon, you get lots of cool perks, including special bonus audio, ad-free versions of this show, Dan's notes, lots of cool stuff. Go check all that out at our Patreon. That link is in our website. I think that's going to go ahead and wrap us up. So thank you, everybody, for listening. And until next time, I can fix that.
Oh, yeah.
Take a bad boy, make him dig 5 feet. The dirt in these shovels will give us a beat. Okay, you gotta find something never found before. If not, we'll just have to dig some more.